Again, huge rounds of applause to the Honorable Paul Martin and Grand Chief Gore Peters. For me personally, I feel like the topic of education is essential for the well-being of Indigenous peoples across North America, and I feel like to live sustainable lives nowadays is we need to become educated and we need to work. Again, I'm currently in my second year at Lake University, and it's a lot. So at this time, I would like to invite the Director of Education for the Chiefs of Ontario, Julia Candlish.
Okay, good morning again, everyone. I don't know if we need the lights dimmer up here. People can see. Can you see the screen okay? No? You're going to? All right. All right, so welcome, everyone. Hopefully, that's a bit of a hard act to follow, for sure, but I'll do my best. So I am going to give an overall update on the Charting Our Own Path Forward initiative, and then just an overview of what we're going to be doing at the symposium. Bear with me while I figure out how to work this. There we go. So the Charting Our Own Path Forward is really an overarching initiative that, you know what, I'm going to get a handheld microphone. Sorry. Okay. But it's not on. Oh, it is on. There we go. All right, so the Charting Our Own Path Forward is an overarching mandate of the First Nations Education Coordination Unit. That's the unit that Grand Chief Peters was talking about when he asked people to stand up. We have representation from all of the PTOs and the educated-related regional organizations. So, Charting Our Own Path Forward is really the guiding kind of mantra of what we do within that coordination unit. The scope, so the coordination unit was formed at the direction of the Chiefs in Assembly in 2000, and the scope of the unit, like Grand Chief Peters talked about, is lifelong learning. So it is the whole scope of learning, both formal and informal, although we do focus a lot on formal education right now. The core issues that the Education Coordination Unit deals with are really all revolve around jurisdiction and funding. Jurisdiction and funding related to early learning, related to K-12 education, related to post-secondary education and training and adult education, all of those things. And our activities include support, coordination, communication, information sharing, intergovernmental liaison, and we develop strategies and policy position papers, and everything goes through leadership before it actually gets implemented. So the source of the mandates for the Education Coordination Unit are from the terms of reference for the coordination unit. We have a terms of reference. It's posted on our website if anybody's ever interested in having a look at it. We also get directives from the Political Confederacy, and the main source of our mandates are really revolve around the resolutions that come out of the Chiefs in Assembly. We do receive political guidance on from several areas. We receive political guidance from the PC Education Portfolio Holder, which is Grand Chief Gordon Peters. The Chiefs Education Committee, we have a Chiefs Education Committee which is comprised of First Nation leaders from the 4 PTOs, and there's a rep from Independent First Nations as well. And we also bring things forward to the Political Confederacy on a regular basis to obtain political guidance. And that's how we move the mandates along. The other way we move mandates along is, so this is a kind of a busy chart, But it provides an idea of what it is that we do when we get the mandates from the Chiefs in Assembly. So we got a mandate to provide recommendations on systems and funding. So when we get that mandate, we have a look at our priority areas, see where it fits in there. So the Education Coordination Unit and the Chiefs Education are kind of in the middle there. First Nations entities are on your left side. And so you'll see First Nation communities, aggregate organizations, which are like tribal councils and PTOs, political confederacy, and the Chiefs in Assembly. And then we are also connected very much to the national body, which is the Assembly of First Nations, of course. And on that, so there's that side of the coin. When we receive a mandate, then you'll see the arrows going kind of in a circular motion. So what we do is we bring things back to the communities, and then we try and bring things back in towards the Education Coordination Unit, so that we can provide recommendations to the Chiefs in Assembly, whatever it is that they're asking us for, right? And then on the other side of the coin, we have outside governments and organizations which are always trying to interact with the Education Coordination Unit. We have the provincial government, so the Ministry of Education, Ministry of Training, Colleges and Universities, the federal government, which is mainly Indian affairs, Indigenous affairs now. And then there's other organizations that always want to interact and get input and want participation on committees and things like that. And those other organizations are organizations like the Ontario College of Teachers or the Ontario Teachers Federation or ETFO. I'm trying to think of, I see the acronym, but I don't know. Elementary Teachers Federation of Ontario, the Ontario Secondary Schools Teachers Federation, things like that. Often they're wanting us to provide input and participate on their committees. So you'll see that the circles go around there, so we're getting information from them, what it is they want us to provide input on, and then we bring it back to the First Nations, and then bring it back to the Education Coordination Unit, and then back out to the organizations or the federal government. So that's kind of the motion that we go through to try and get the information. Whenever we sit on one of the committees at the provincial or federal or other organizations, we never sit there as representatives. We never speak for the First Nations unless we've gone back to the First Nations in one of those circles and obtained the information to bring forward. So we always tell them, we can't answer these questions for you because we need to go back to our communities and get that information and then bring it back forward. So that's kind of how we work with the Education Coordination Unit. The main thing that we do is coordination and for First Nations education, and then advocate on behalf of the First Nations. So the mandate for the mandates that revolve around this symposium, we received a resolution in 2012 that directed the Education Coordination Unit to work with First Nations to develop recommendations to the Chiefs in Assembly on systems and funding mechanisms for First Nations education. And then in 2013, because we always have to go back to the Chiefs in Assembly and report where we're at, right? So in 2012, I think they were asking for recommendations by 2013. Well, we didn't have them at that point in time. So we reported back on what we had, and so they give us another resolution that direct the scope of the work to take a bit of a different direction. So we tried that. That didn't work. So again, in 2013, we got another resolution that just was overarching on our inherent jurisdiction over education and just kind of asked us to continue the work going forward. So that's where our mandate comes from to do the work that we're doing today and that we have been doing since 2012. So when we had a look at the mandate asked us to analyze systems and analyze funding mechanisms. So we thought, so how do we do that in a very simplistic way? You just have a look at this little chart, and it says, what do we have now? So what kind of system do we work with for First Nations education right now? And then on the other hand, we have to say, well, what is it that we want? So we have this system here, but what kind of a system do we really want? And then have a look at what we have and how can it be streamlined or improved to get us to that vision, right? To get us to where we want to be. So we thought to analyze the systems, we had to look at the governance tables that were taking place. So Anishinaabe Nation, the Union of Ontario Indians have governance tables specifically on First Nation education. So work with them to see where they're at in their negotiations, what kind of work they've done. We don't want to reinvent the wheel if we don't have to. Gather input from communities and organizations. Look at other models so we can do a bit of a comparison. Like I say, we don't always want to have to reinvent the wheel. And then build on successes. Build on the successes that we have in our communities. I believe it was Grand Chief Peters, or maybe it was the regional chief that talked about it this morning. But we do have lots of successes within our communities. How do we bring that forward? It was Grand Chief Peters, I remember now. Those best practices, we need to share those and we need to build on them to move forward. What did I do with my little clicker? And then when we're analyzing funding mechanisms, again, same kind of thing. What do we have now? How can it be improved or streamlined? And then at the end, how much will it cost, and how will that funding flow, right? So it's all the same kind of thing. We have to say what it is that we want, what it is that we have now, and then how do we get there? So there's a comparison with, we thought that we needed to do a comparison with the provincial system. We need to review the work of the governance tables again, because they have done work in this area on funding, and research other existing models and mechanisms. So same kind of deal with the funding mechanisms. So what the methodology has been to move towards the recommendations to the Chiefs and Assembly on systems and funding. We did an environmental scan, and that really analyzed that first circle. What is it that we have now? Where are we at? Environmental scan provided that for us. We held focus group sessions, several focus group sessions. I think there's been 5 so far, to create a vision. What is that end goal that we're looking for? And how do we improve and streamline the system, and obtain that input that we need? As that previous slide, we always need to go back to the communities, the organizations, and get that input in order to bring it forward. Education officer gatherings, we had a couple of those, and we call them education officer gatherings just for lack of a better word, but really it's the education directors and managers at the community and tribal council level that were invited to come to those gatherings and really talk about this Charting Your Own Path Forward initiative and and exchange ideas on systems of funding. And we had, this is the second symposium. We had a symposium in 2013, and then we had a summit in 2013 as well, or it might have been 2014. But it's all in that document that you have. And that, once again, that was to share information, build on successes, and obtain input. So what the document is that you were provided when you came to, before you came to the session, and I must apologize that you didn't receive a lot of notice with receiving the document. We were working on it right up until the bitter end there. But that document, and does everyone know the document that I'm talking about? Because if you don't have the document, it's the Charting Your Own Path Forward initiative, yes. If you don't have the document, they do have some at the registration table. So it's an evergreen document. The way that we've worked this since 2012, we've been working on this Charting Your Own Path Forward initiative. This part of the Charting Your Own Path Forward initiative, and we've been gathering information, gathering input through the focus group sessions, through the summit, through all the various forums that we've had. And we continually add to this document, and we continually change or just modify things according to the input that we receive from First Nations and First Nation organizations. So the document that you have now is the document for today. It's going to change after this, right? So that's why we call it a living or evergreen document. And it really embraces the spirit of unity, and unity that we're doing something unified all together, First Nations in Ontario. It has a spirit of vision and organic evolution. So it's ever changing based on our vision and how we want to get to the vision, how we want to move there, how we want to walk there together, Nagani Da. So the document also synthesizes all of the collective input to date, and what you'll see is a support circles framework lens, and that's what has been developed out of all of the input that we've received so far, was that lens. And then what we did with that lens is we utilized that lens to develop ideas and options on systems and funding for consideration moving forward. It also provides some context. It provides a little bit of information on stats and the reality of what we're dealing with, the systems that we're dealing with right now. There's also three appendices that we put in there because they're relevant to the document, but it's not something that we thought needed to be right in the document. So the COOPF resolutions, all of the wording is there, the exact wording for the resolutions are there as an appendix in the document. Then there's the First Nation inherent jurisdiction over education. This was developed to provide a rationale for First Nations jurisdiction over education, not that we need a rationale for it, but in case you're trying to explain that rationale to others, it provides a lot of really good, solid information on how we can express what jurisdiction over education is. Appendix C is a draft education declaration. Now this has been called for repeatedly. This is a draft, it's a first draft. I want everyone to know that. It's been called for over and over again at conferences and focus group sessions. As I was going through the notes, updating the evergreen document for this meeting, I could see how many times over the course of the last few years somebody has said, we need to have a declaration. We need to have a declaration on education. So we did a real preliminary draft and put it in there so that we can start the discussion on developing a declaration for First Nations education. So one of the things so when we're talking about what it is that we have to do in developing these systems and these funding mechanisms and models and things like that, we have to look at what we have today, right? So this is a little diagram. It's not 100% correct, but it's close. Because things are ever changing in the First Nation world, as you know. So this is kind of what we currently look like if we were thinking that we were any semblance of a system. So we have 133 First Nations, and you can see that from those 133 First Nations, we have 76 communities that have council-operated schools. We have 2 communities that have federal schools. Out of those 76 communities with First Nation schools, 24 have K-12, 52 have elementary only, some form of elementary. It might only go to grade 3, it might only have kindergarten, it might go all the way to grade 8, but I didn't want to break all those down. There's 57 First Nations with no schools, so these ones would have to deal with tuition agreements with the public school boards for all of their students to go out. Many of the 76 First Nations that do have council-operated schools also have tuition agreements because at some point in time, their students have to go out into the provincial system. Out of these 133 First Nations, we have 4 provincial territorial organizations, NAN, Union, Grand Council Treaty 3, AIAI, Out of that, 2 of those, NAN and the union, have a governance table on First Nations education. That means they're working towards a self-government agreement with the federal government on education. There's also independent First Nations, and then there's also unaffiliated First Nations who are not part of any of the provincial territorial organizations. We have, I believe, 4 communities right now that are unaffiliated, but they're still part of the Chiefs of Ontario, but they're just not part of a territorial organization. So that kind of goes in the COO bubble, because that's all kind of within the realm of what COO does. And then you'll see some dotted lines. And the dotted lines go out to the other organizations that are not directly part of the Chiefs of Ontario, but we do interact with them on a very regular basis, and they're very involved with First Nations education. So we have ONICA, the Ontario Native Counselor Education Counseling Association. We have 7 Indigenous post-secondary institutions. 5 of those post-secondary institutions form the Aboriginal Institutes Consortium. So as you can see, it's all just a little bit complicated to try and bring it all together under and in some kind of a semblance of a system. There's also 21, so there's 112 First Nations that are part of a tribal council. There's 17 tribal councils. Out of those 17 tribal councils, I believe only 13 offer First Nations education services. Yeah, 13. So and out of those 13, 5 offer what has been determined as complex education services. And this is through the environmental scan that I talked about just a little bit earlier. So the environmental scan kind of grouped the tribal councils into the types of services that they offered for First Nations. So there's complex, there's a coordination and advisory, and then there's advisory, and I can't remember what the other word is. But so even the tribal councils don't all offer the same type of services for First Nations education. So as you can see, it's a little bit complex, and then there's no real mechanism to coordinate what those tribal councils are doing for First Nations education. Oh, there's also 21 First Nations that are not even affiliated with the tribal council. So they don't even, they're not even part of those services that are offered by the tribal councils. There's no real way of kind of sharing the information among the tribal councils. There's no real way of sharing the information, say, from the Indigenous post-secondary institutions with the tribal councils, or with the First Nations, with or without council-operated schools. And so that's what we're dealing with. Nothing, we have all of these kind of islands of things happening, pockets of things happening, but there's nothing to coordinate it up, and there's nothing to ensure that the information is shared, ensure that everybody has the information that they need. There's no coordinated way of sharing best practices, things like that. So that's the system that we're kind of working with right now, and that's why we're trying to move to another way of doing things. I don't think that anybody disagrees that the current system is not functioning the way we would like it to function. So, as I talked about earlier, we've had lots of input over time, and it's informed this support circles framework. So what we've heard time and time again is that the First Nation learner is at the center of everything. This is what education is for. It's for the learner. And we use the term learner just because we want to make sure that it embraces the concept of lifelong learning. If we use the term student, then that really kind of narrows it down to formal education, or maybe even K-12 education, you know. So we want to make sure that we're capturing the broader scope of lifelong learning. So that's why we use the term learner. And then for that learner, there has to be a support system, right? something to support that learner, and that's what we call the first support circle. And this is the place of learning, and the reason why we use the term place of learning is to embrace the concept of lifelong learning. It's a place of learning. It's not necessarily a school. It's not necessarily a college or a university, but it is a place of learning. And so it's whatever types of places of learning. It may be a daycare, it may be a childcare, it may be a Head Start. So we use the term place of learning and community. So that's the first support circle for those students. For a single student, that the community and the institution or the place that they go to learn, that is their first circle of support. And then over time, people, over the course of all the discussions that we've had, everyone's talked about very strongly about the need to have a second support circle. And this is the regional aggregate collectives. This is the tribal councils. This is the FNSSP groups. This is perhaps even your PTO. It kind of depends because everybody works a little bit differently, right? So there has to be some kind of a second support circle that supports those communities at the community level. So we don't have each 133 communities all by themselves doing their own thing, doing exactly the same thing, reinventing the wheel all by themselves. So they come together in collective organizations so that they can do things together and they can share things together and they can work together. It always works more effectively when you have help, right? So that is the second support circle. And then conversations over time also they actually started right off the bat saying that we need a third support circle, an Ontario-wide aggregate of some sort that is a collective organization or a collective partnership that supports all of those different circles. And the reason why the circles aren't kind of circles surrounded by other circles, they're kind of in this shape that's all connected at the bottom, is because what we've heard over time is that all of these circles need to be connected, and that's what I talked about earlier in the diagram that showed the current system that we work in. There's so much disconnection. Nothing is connected up in a coordinated way. So this is what we heard, that we need to make sure that all of these support circles that are supporting the student, the learner, are connected, and that they're all focused on supporting the First Nation learner. But as we know, we do have lots of our students attend the provincial school system, right? In fact, when we look at statistics, and First Nation leadership has said, we have jurisdiction over the education of our children regardless of where they reside. So regardless if they reside on a First Nation community, within a First Nation community, or outside. And when we look at those numbers, 75% of our students attend the provincial school system. So we have to be connected to the provincial school system. And outside governments like the Ministry of Education and the federal government, who provides funding, we need to be able to work with those systems to ensure that, because it's all part of the system that we work within. So there will be some sort of connection between the first support circle, which is at the community level, with the outside organizations. And this could be in the form of a tuition agreement, like I was talking about earlier. Communities have tuition agreements with public school boards. So that's a connection to the outside for this first support circle. There's a second support circle connection to the outside as well, because as we know, FNSSP groups do work with the province, right? So there has to be a connection there as well. and then also a connection with the third support circle as well, in order to advocate on behalf of First Nations. So that's kind of an explanation of the support circles framework and how it came about from input that we have heard to date. Fundamental considerations that were undertaken when we were developing the support circle framework is that we had to make sure that it supports First Nation learners and lifelong learning. Those are two kind of no-brainers. Respect First Nation sovereignty and inherent rights, support First Nation control of First Nation education, and respect autonomy and embrace diversity. That is very important. That respect autonomy and embrace diversity. That's a pretty tricky thing when you're developing ideas on a system. How do you ensure that First Nations have their autonomy, and that the broad diversity that we have within First Nations in Ontario is recognized and actually embraced? So, second and third support circle models you'll see in your documents, that there's discussion starters there. We want to make sure everyone knows these are just discussion starters. This is not something that we develop saying that this is the way we should do it. These are things that we've heard over time in several of the sessions. Oh, I think that if we were designing something, we should design it based on geography. So we took the framework and designed something based on geography with those 3 support circles. Somebody at a session, or lots of people actually at lots of sessions, said we should have a treaty-based system. That's how our system should be organized. Tribal council focused, PTO based, nation based, and then there's a combination. And this is the one where we really had a hard look at everything and thought, how do we embrace that diversity? How do we make sure that First Nations have their autonomy to decide how they want to move forward here, who they want to aggregate with, if they want to aggregate with anybody, all of these different things. So we designed a discussion starter called it a blended combination. And in that combination, there are, say there's 30 communities that want to be based on geographic proximity. Maybe there's one treaty organization that wants it treaty-based. Maybe there is, maybe the Union of Ontario Indians wants to maintain their Anishinaabeg education system as an element of the system. So it's almost like a system within a system. It's a blended system. It incorporates the reality of the direction that First Nations want to go in. So really, the sky's the limit with working with this framework of support circles. Then when we look at funding considerations, we've had previous discussions and analysis that reveal that funding should be flowed to First Nations via a Treasury Board transfer with levels determined through a comprehensive funding formula. So that has been something that's been very prominent, and nobody has ever diverged from that through any of the conversations that we've had to date. Nobody thinks that the funding should still flow through Indian Affairs. Everybody thinks that the funding should come directly from Treasury Board to First Nations. Everybody agrees that there should be a comprehensive funding formula and that we should be doing away with all of the proposal-based programs, well, most of the proposal-based programs, and that the funding needs to be needs-based. So those are things that we've heard over and over. So there is ideas and options on funding flow that need to be further explored and discussed. There's outcomes of the symposium. So outcomes of this symposium will assist in the continued analysis of funding levels. So funding levels, it's a pretty tricky one to try and, we've done lots of work on funding levels, and we have lots of bits of information that we can't actually put all together yet because we don't know what kind of a system it is we're going to be looking at. If we kind of knew, honestly, I don't want to do the work of putting it together for every single option. I think if we narrow options to maybe 2 or 3, then we could do that work and put a number to it. But every system is going to be looking at maybe different arrangements for funding. So funding levels, lots of work has been done there, like I say, but we need to maybe have a little bit more understanding of what our system is going to be before we can actually come up with some substantive figures there. Further analysis is required on the actual mechanism required to trigger the Treasury Board transfer because as we understand it right now, the only real way to trigger the Treasury Board transfer is through legislation or through a self-government agreement. And we know that not everyone wants a self-government agreement, and we know that not everyone wants legislation either. So that is something that needs to be further explored. So as for the symposium that we're having here for the next few days, the focus is visionary and solution-oriented. I know at the last symposium, I gave everybody 5 minutes to vent and rant about all of the things that were wrong with their education system, because that's not what we're here to talk about. We know what's wrong with our education system. We've talked about it and talked about it and talked about it. What we need to do is we need to be visionary and we need to come up with solutions, whatever that is. But that's the way we need to focus over the next few days. The purpose of this symposium is to gather people involved in First Nation education and review what's been done previously and build on the knowledge gathered to date. If that means tearing some of it down, then that's fine. But we just need to make sure that we're building on what's, and we have good reasons why we're breaking something down if that doesn't really work for us. But really, we just need to continue building towards our vision. The intended outcome of the symposium is a more comprehensive vision for systems and funding that will provide a basis for subsequent input. So we're not going to develop recommendations to the leadership right out of the symposium, although that would be wonderful if we did. I would love it. But I'm not sure that we're going to get there over the next few days, but we'll get closer. And what we want to be able to come out of the symposium with is a narrowing of options or an expansion of options that captures the way we want to move forward. And then from there, we'll continue building on it until we are able to develop those recommendations to the Chiefs Assembly together over the next little while. And I think that I have put some dates up here. Maybe it's later on in the slide. So the agenda, it's visionary, and we have visionary and motivating speakers at the beginning and the end of each day. So we're hoping that by having the speakers here, then you don't have to listen to me ramble on for ages, for one thing. But the speakers can kind of just get your head in a different space. We need to understand where we are today, but we don't need to get mired in all of the things that are wrong with our system now. We need to put the blinders on, or just kind of step out of that and just vision. What is it that we want, right, to move forward? Because we have a willing government right now that needs to hear what it is that we want. So we need to be able to express that. There's panel presentations, so this is the success stories, right? On the first support circle, at the community place of learning level, and then at the second support circle, at the more aggregated level, we have panel presentations where people are going to come and share all of their success stories. And so hopefully that's motivating for people to understand or to utilize when we're doing these exercises. So the exercises will take place in the dedicated time for group discussions, and this will be an opportunity to provide feedback and input on what's being presented and provide direction on moving forward. So those sessions will be just working at your tables. And there will be a note taker and a facilitator at each table as you go through the exercises, and there's going to be an exercise on the first support circle, the second support circle, the third support circle, and funding. So we'll be talking about the whole kit and caboodle over the 3 days, and hopefully we can come out with some really positive input. So the next steps, this is the chart I was looking for, and I think this is the last one. So the next step, post-symposium. Just so you know what's going to happen after the symposium, there will be a roll-up document from the symposium that includes systems and fundings, ideas and options, and reflect all of the input that we receive. So that roll-up report will be provided. We're committing to providing that by January 2016. There will be follow-up activity on the COO Education Portal, and many of you may not know what the COO Education Portal is, but we haven't really been able to kind of, it's there, but it hasn't been utilized to its fullest potential. So we're hoping to utilize that to gather the rest of the input after the symposium. So that will take place between January and April. So if anybody needs access to the portal, please feel free to email me anytime, and we'll make sure you get access to the portal, and that means you'll be able to provide input on the various areas that we're talking about. There will be ongoing political guidance that will be sought through the Political Confederacy, Education Portfolio, and the Chiefs Education Committee. So they will be engaged on everything going forward. They'll be provided updates on a regular basis, and we'll make sure that everyone stays informed on how this is unfolding. Okay, so where are we at there, Tristan, for time? 11:28. Okay, well, we can take a few questions if anybody has questions. We have time. Minister Bennett is going to be coming in, I think, to talk, and but she's not quite ready yet. So, questions? Yes, Matthew, would you mind coming to the microphone? Sorry, we're live streaming, so we want people to hear the questions.
Yeah. Right. Matthew Anges, I'm from Waterman Lake First Nation. I just wanted to know, with all the plans that Chiefs of Ontario are presenting today, and in terms of all the work that the other PTOs are doing, how are we going to be able to combine everything together in terms of trying to come something that is workable? Just wanted to know, because a lot of people want to do different things, and it's very hard because it's frustrating in a way that nobody is really directing the ship, I guess I'll put it that way. We kind of need somebody to oversee the whole process, because I know it takes a lot of money for people to come here, but for me, in a way, because it's an important thing, and also the overall, the national level. How whatever we come up with in Ontario, how is it going to connect to the overall national formulas and all that? That's what I wanted to know. Okay,
yeah, that's a great question, Matthew. And what I can say is, so looking at Ontario specifically, when you look through the Charting Your Own Path Forward, the 2015 document, you'll see that often it looks at those examples or those discussion starters that I talked about, and then after each of those discussion starters diagram, we talk about the advantages and disadvantages of each of those systems, just so that we can get an idea of what is it that we're talking about, right? And a lot of times you'll see that the disadvantage is that it may not fit with what's happening in the PTOs. It may not fit with what's happening with structural readiness, right? So those are things that we have to consider, and that's really why we came up with that blended model. That blended model, so that we can incorporate what's going on in the PTOs. Structural readiness is a bit of a different animal, and this is one of the things. This is one of the divide and conquer tactics, or whatever you want to call it, from the federal government, right? Where they put out money to certain organizations to do work in this area. Well, maybe the work that's being done in this area doesn't really jive with the work, maybe the work that's being done by an overarching. So even within Anishinaabe Nation, say, there's structural readiness dollars that are being utilized by a handful of communities, but that work that they're actually doing may not even really agree with, or may collide somehow with the work that's being done by the PTO on the self-government agreement. So those are the kinds of things we have to try and get away from letting them get in our way of doing things in a unified manner. So I think that what we may need to do is we may need to have some more conversations about how it is that we can incorporate all of these things into one system. It can be very diverse. We want to make sure that we embrace that diversity. So that's why we came up with the blended model. So I would have a look at that. Hopefully that helps you out a bit. And the other thing about First Nations in Ontario and how we're able to organize together is because we have the Education Coordination Unit, right? So we have members on the coordination unit from Anishinaabe Nation that can talk about, hey, this might be interfering with what's going on in our communities. And we have a member from the Union of Ontario Indians that says, hey, this may interfere with what's going on in our communities. So we have, or with our governance table. So we have those opportunities to come together and make sure that what we're doing is actually going to align, or is actually able to be flexible enough to incorporate all of those diverse needs, right? And then at the national level, what I don't know if many of you remember, but last December, yes, last December, so almost a year ago now, we put forward, there was a resolution that went forward, all chiefs across the country, asking for a specific way for the federal government to deal with First Nations education, and that was to really deal with each region on its own. So there is no overarching plan across the country. It's each region that is doing its own thing. So there may be, I think there was a call for national legislation, but that legislation was only to flow funding, and that's it. Really, each region was developing its own comprehensive funding formula. Each region was developing its own system. Anything else? Either I was so clear in my presentation, or you're all just crazy confused about what we're talking about. Both. Okay, great. Yes. Sorry. Yeah. What do we want to do? Good morning. Oh.
Okay. Good morning. It's almost lunchtime. I just want to say a few things. I enjoy coming to things like these, listening to what we could do for our students. But one of the things I always fail to hear is how we can actually help a child learn. And one of the things I've learned through my years of being involved in education, I was wrong as a teacher for so long until I realized that I had to look back and see how we came into this world. We are so involved with finances, we almost forget to teach the children, because we need to get down to earth with our children. Children are born wholesome individuals, and we take so much money and so much time to take away that wholesomeness. And it is because we do not consider the parents, the teachers, how they should teach the children. For many years, I taught from a textbook, thinking that was the way for the students I taught would learn about life, a life learning process. But it turned out that's not the case. That's why we're losing so many of our young people today through education, through suicide, because we're not too clear in what we want them to do. We do not have clear expectations of them. We need to learn, get down to their level, parents' level. There are some parents that do not even want to be involved with their children because they feel they have been taken away from education. I have heard parents that have gone to residential school, and when they go home, they say they're not my children anymore. I don't need to have anything to do with them. They only look after the ones that they kept at home. There are many situations like that. And that's what we're doing, is we're making the parents feel that they don't own their children anymore. And I'm really proud to be able to see something set up like this. And I hope it gets down to the community level, because we need to train parents to be parents and to understand how important the education for their children is. We need to teach them that. And the teachers need to be wholesome also, well-being teachers to teach our children. I was not a well-being teacher for the first few years. I was a sick teacher, and more sicker because I was looking at a text that was created by somebody I did not know. And then when I realized that, I turned around and I said, I will go back to where I came from. And I looked back at my culture. I went into teachings that taught me about life that I had left to go into the Western system. And when I came out of there, I saw things differently. I looked at myself, what am I doing as a teacher? I'm not well. I need to be well. And then once I got there, I went many years to go back to who I was in a trap line, to look at the teachings, the learnings I had there. I went back and got them, and I feel wholesome again. The only thing that still has a hold on me is I like to gamble a little bit. So anyways, that's, I'm going to enjoy being involved here because I have a lot of information that I learned from going back to my culture to help with the students and others that I work with. I try to do that. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone. Looking forward to the next couple of days.
First off, I would just like to thank all the people in the audience for your questions. I felt like they were pretty sincere and broad. A question that I pose myself on a daily basis is how can we decolonize the discourse of inadequate education in our communities? How can we actively deconstruct the discussion of this education system, and how can we come to a level of provincial standards within our communities? In my perspective, I feel like the knowledge that you can receive from your elders, from your traditional people in your communities is uncomparable to the knowledge that you can receive sitting in a classroom. With that being said, I'd like to thank Julia for this concise overview of the charter, our own path forward. Niganida. I know this presentation was pretty broad. There's a lot to take in, and I feel like in the coming days that we just learn more, and we just learn more, and we just become educated of this matter, and become educated of what Chiefs of Ontario and every other PTO is doing on regards to education. So again, a round of applause for Julia. At this time, I'd like to pass the mic over to my colleague, Tristan.
Hello, everyone. I'm supposed to announce, welcome Carolyn Bennett, but I do not know where she is, or she's missing, I guess.
Okay. Actually, we're going to pass the mic over to the Ontario Regional Chief, Isidore Day.
So far, this has been a very, very good day, and again, we're getting very close to lunch, and I think we are on schedule. However, the minister's been pulled back by the media there a little bit. So I was asked to introduce the minister, so I'm going to do that. I want to just first of all start by saying that when you think of Carolyn Bennett, some of you may recall the work that she's been doing in her role as an advocate, as a longtime Liberal. She is a doctor, a medical doctor. She has had the health portfolio with the Liberal government as well. So she understands the issue of health and well-being. I was just indicating to the minister that I have the health and social portfolio for the Assembly of First Nations, and again, I'm so glad that I get to work with the likes of Minister of Indigenous and Northern Affairs Canada and Carolyn Bennett, because she certainly is going to bring with her the professional credentials and experience of being a doctor, somebody who understands health issues, but because she has also worked with First Nation issues with the Liberal Party for quite some time, she certainly does know what the issues are. Just so folks know a little bit more, again, as I stated earlier, it was on November 4th in the swearing in that I had asked Carolyn Bennett to be here. she previously was not scheduled to be here at this event. However, when I asked her, she immediately said yes. Again, what that signaled to me was that we're working with a Liberal government that is not only going to talk, they're not only going to say things that we want to hear, but they're also going to step out and they're going to act on those commitments. And again, just so you know, this is not just a photo op or an opportunity to spend time with the minister. We're actually doing work, and that there are issues that we're going to be putting in front of the minister here in a short while after she speaks. But we'll be talking about specifically what the Right Honourable Paul Martin had indicated was that we need a plan. We'll be talking about what that plan is in terms of the intermediate long term, but what are some of the immediate things that we can look at as well. We want to express to the minister in a very pointed and direct way some of the very specific things that can be done now. I don't want to divulge those things at this particular time because I want to, in all fairness, get those in front of the minister. I'll report back to the political confederacy and the chiefs. But overall, I am very happy to introduce Carolyn Bennett here. Just one last quick story. One time I went to Parliament Hill, and Derek Niepenak and I, it was after we stormed Parliament Hill. We had always had friends in the Liberal government, and it was Carolyn Bennett who guided us through to meet with the Sergeant at Arms, and we had come upon a mock assembly in Parliament. There was a number of young people there, but what Carolyn Bennett knew was she knew all the Aboriginal children or youth that were actually participating in this mock assembly. And again, I had always gotten the sense that the minister now cares about issues of First Nations, and certainly I've always known Carolyn to be out there in front of the issues. She was at the Chief Spence issues, not just that particular issue, but really listening to the issues and concerns of our people at that time. And again, it really is an honor to welcome Dr. Carolyn Bennett, Minister of Indigenous and Northern Affairs Canada. Help me welcome